pressing again. Is he going to finish?
Unbelievable stuff!
He's done it.
The old school broken time attack from Peter Jopik has taken them through to the medal match here in Germany. That is unbelievable. Germany are back.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Olympic Foil. Today I'm happy to say I have a special guest interview, Karim Bashir. You know him already, even if you don't think you do. He is the voice of fencing commentary. You've heard his dulcet tones over every finals match, I'm sure, or at least some video at some point. Thank you for agreeing to interview, Karim.
My pleasure, James. It's a pleasure to be here. Always good to talk about fencing.
Okay, so I have a list of questions I want to ask you, and some of these I'm very much looking forward to. But perhaps the best place to start is, how did you get started in commentary?
It's a good question. I'll give you a really short version of it because the long version is crazy. I finished fencing myself in 2006 and took a little bit of time away from the sport, working on personal career and all that kind of stuff, and ended up coming back into the sport a few years later, and started to work on a fairly volunteer basis with British Fencing in terms of building up the communications and helping them with media. And it was at a time when there was very little resource, so even more so than it is today. The Federation was reliant on those volunteers. Move forward a couple more years, we get the European Championships in Sheffield. I was asked to run the media office at the Championships. First time we'd had a senior major in the UK. And a few weeks before the tournament was due to get underway, there were £3,000 or £4,000 left in the budget, and everyone was sitting around a table, and the management team said, what would you do with it if you had this money? Again, long story short, I said I'd live stream it. First time the European Championships would be live streamed, and they said, great, go and find someone who'll do it for £4,000. And bizarrely, I was able to find a team in Sheffield who were able to do it. Very happy with that. I carried on doing the normal day-to-day stuff, so, getting the press office set up for the international journalists, mainly coming over to get sound bites from the new zonal champions. And about 36 hours before tee-off, the TV company, or the broadstream live stream company, came to me and said, we're ready for your sound check. And, I'm completely honest, I hadn't thought about commentary at all. I just thought, we're going to live stream, fantastic. But they wanted a sound check, and I just didn't have enough time to go and look for someone else, and I ended up bringing up a mate of mine to do some of the stuff that I was going to be doing in the press office, while I spent those 36 hours basically studying the form. But foil wasn't a problem for me. I knew all the foilists, or knew who they were at least. But the other weapons I had to do some boning up on, and started there. It was within a minute or two, I was like, this is great. This is, this is amazing. I'm talking about my sport. And I'd watched I'm a big sports fan, so I'd seen a lot of commentary, and I guess sort of somewhere it sort of what I'd worked out, you have to introduce where you are and what the weapon is and what stage of the competition it is and all those sort of mechanical things. But actually talking about the fencing itself was relatively easy. Straight after the European Championships, the FIE came to me and said, will you come and do the World Championships? So 5 weeks later, I was in Catania doing those championships. And then it just snowballed from there. London 2012, BBC came to me, asked me if I'd like to do the expert role for them at London. And then from there, Olympic Broadcast Service asked me if I'd go to Rio. I've done Buenos Aires, the Youth Olympics in 2018, did Tokyo as well. I've ended up then sort of transferring those skills. So I did a little bit of training. Once I went to London, I kind of my eyes were open to the world of commentary. There's me sitting in a room with 200 or 300 other people, including the likes of Sue Barker and Gary Lineker, and all of the big sort of presenters and commentators at the time. And just seeing what they did and how they did it was like, wow, okay, I need to learn how to do this properly. So I went and invested in myself and did a bit of training in voice projection, in commentary style, in storytelling. Was a big part of it, making sure you understand that there are some narratives that need to run, especially on a long day of fencing. And but I then ended up getting called up by World Archery to lead their commentary teams, and I've been doing that since 2017. And I think to date I've done, I think it's 15 sports. I thought it was 14, but I did one session of half pipe snowboard in Pyeongchang at the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang as a stand-in. I had to come in because another session was running over and the commentator couldn't move from one to another, so I ended up doing some snowboarding half pipe, which is incredible. But yeah, I've done summer and winter. It's crazy. But great. And doing the lead stuff in the other sports, because I came at it from fencing, which is so technical and heavy on a good understanding of how the sport works, especially in those weapons of convention. To be able to understand, we can't tell everybody everything about the beautiful circular cease coupe flick to shoulder, because only a small percentage of the audience is going to understand what that means. So trying to get that storytelling in without crossing too far over the technical boundaries, I found really entertaining and really enjoyable.
Yes, and this I'm wondering now, since you've done so many sports, has it changed how you're coming back to fencing for commentary?
Certainly since Sheffield. Yeah, I mean Sheffield was it was more like your sort of Sky Sports fan commentary rather than professional commentary. It's I'm not saying it's anything like professional commentary now. Well, hopefully it is, because I'm getting employed by a number of other people. But that I always came into fencing thinking, myself and my brother fenced from 7 years old until we were into our. But certainly I was in my 30s when I quit. My brother was probably in his late 20s. But my parents never understood what the heck was going on. They turn up at competitions, drivers to competitions, and they're like, what's going on? So I thought, well, how do I talk to my mum? How do I tell my mum what's going on? And that's really how I approached it. And I think a lot of that came from doing London 2012, where one of the key things that was in this big meeting with 250 odd people, the head of sports said, what we want you to be is the friend sitting on the sofa next to the other people watching the sport. So you're kind of telling them what's going on, trying to explain a little bit about the sport, but not expecting them to run away and be, complete experts walking away from one session of watching fencing or archery or whatever sport it is that I'm doing. So it solidified my thinking that we needed to communicate the sport to a wider group than, us fencing fans, because us fencing fans will watch it if there's Chinese commentary. It doesn't really make any difference. And
I've been that friend. Now that you pointed out, it's like, yeah, probably fencing. We've all been the person sitting there watching with someone who knows nothing about it. That's a very good point. So perhaps onto the next point. Since you've been doing this a while, you've seen a lot of fencing. Are there any that really stick out? Any matches that are like, wow?
When you communicated with me before this, I thought, there are a few that stick out, but there are just so many that, you end up, especially when you do so many sports, you end up, sort of a lot of it blends into, was it that German in that sport? Or was it, so I had to have a little think. I mean, there's some real standouts. There are some real standouts. James Davis winning the European Championships. And that was a match that kind of had everything. It was a rematch of the bronze medal match from the year before. I think that was in Zagreb, and we were now 2014 in Strasbourg. It was up against Jerry Misinoff again, who he'd lost to in the semi-finals in Zagreb. He was, I want to get this right, I think he was 10-5 down. I think it was 10-5 down. There was obviously that sort of revenge element to it, or, I want to get you back sort of thing. And Alexis great, he's a lovely guy, and a great fencer as well. Very difficult on the piste. He was an awkward fencer, that's for sure. Very canny. But something went wrong with James's kit, so he was registering a on-target light on his arm, where obviously that should be a white light.
Right.
And he went and changed his kit, and what happened in that break, I have no idea. But the magic spray really worked because he came back out and he won the match 10-1. He only gave away one hit after that change of kit. So that was incredible. And obviously, first British European champion. That was an incredible match. And unfortunately, I think the ones that really stood out for me when I started going through it were all the British ones. So Richard
Right.
Cruz winning in defending his title in Shanghai against Facconi in a brilliant match, and both of them been fencing so well all day that it was like, who's gonna take this? And Richard was just on another level, even to Facconi on that day. I think you look across the other weapons as well. I think there are certain fencers that stand out rather than particular fights. So Zalagi's an interesting one in saber. You know, he regularly goes out on the 64. He struggles sometimes in the 64, but sometimes you see him going really far into the competition when he's had a really, really hard 64 and won it. But winning 3 times in the Olympic Games was incredible. Lee Kiefer, I've said for a few years, pre-COVID as well. I think she's the whole package. It's just whether she turns up on the day. She's got full attack. She's got a full raft of defense. She's got great counter attack, and it was amazing to see her win the Olympic gold medal in Tokyo. And she was genuinely shocked, and I was like sitting there going, "How can you be that shocked? You really are the complete package."
Yeah, number one.
Just incredible. Aldo Montano in men's saber, another one. He's just, even when he should have retired, he stuck around for the team to qualify for Tokyo. Brilliant guy as well. In men's épée, Yannick Burrell is, no one can beat him on his day. He's incredible. He's an incredible fencer. And I think in the women's épée is probably the most open. With Chang from Korea, Kong from Hong Kong, or however many 9, 12, 15 French fencers that they make it a really interesting and open weapon as well. So, yeah, standout fights have fallen on the Brits. Oh, there was another one actually. The Germany-Italy match at European Championships, I think in 2016, where everyone was just, well, Italy going to win this. This is men's foil, so it's men's foil team, and it was just such an amazing match, such an incredible match, which Germany in the end won, but I think it was 45-43 or 45-44. It was very tight and just needle right the way through to the end. So I'll shut up now.
I think I remember that match. Truly incredible.
Yeah.
And épée is an interesting one because people always say it's so unpredictable compared to the others.
Yeah, I think more so in men's épée. Yeah, you do get the odd high-seeded fencer going out in 64 and 32 in women's, but probably not so much. There's sort of like a group of women's épées who always seem to make it through to like the 16 at least. Whereas in men's, look at Budapest Grand Prix final. They've got the men's 4 was Cohen was in there. It was just, anything can happen in men's épée especially.
Okay, so there's a question here I've been particularly looking forward to. I think you know which one it is. I want to hear about travel stories, some of the interesting things you've seen going all over the world, maybe best experience, worst experience, nicest place to stay. What do you think? Anything that sticks out?
Yeah, almost every trip is an adventure, and I think that's what I enjoy. I like the whole element of going. It's not just the commentary, which obviously I love, but the whole adventure of going there. It reminds me of when I was fencing. Basically, it's kind of like a big traveling circus of
traveling circus. That's a good description of it.
Yeah, fencing geeks traveling around the world. There's some standouts. I think I'll pick 3. I'll start with the worst one, right? Which was very early in my sort of Grand Prix commentary gigs. I went to Seoul for the first time, which is a magnificent place, a great city, amazing. But I didn't really see any of it the first time I went there. So I jump on the aeroplane, and we've been used to, when we were fencing, traveling long distances, to immediately get onto time zones. So you immediately set your watch to the destination, especially on the long flights. So you try and sleep when they're asleep, where you're going. Okay. I kind of managed this. I thought I'd done all right going to Seoul. But it was on the back of a third weekend, basically. So I'd done Europe, I'd done Central America or South America the weekend before that, and then for the third weekend in a row, I was going to another concert. So my body was all over the place anyway. Anyway, I fell asleep on the plane as I should have done. I woke up and I should have done, and but I landed at a really awkward time. It was like mid-morning. Got through the airport, got to the hotel. As normal, there's 1,500 people trying to check in at the same time. So standing there for 2 hours. And by the time I got to my room, it was like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought, right, I'm feeling a bit tired, but I'm gonna be cool. I'm gonna get everything ready. I usually get there, just unpack a little bit. I tend not to unpack because you're only there for a few nights, but unpack your toilet bag and put that in the bathroom, do all that. And then I sat down at the end of the bed and I thought to myself, right, I'll phone home. I'll just quickly just log onto the internet and just phone home. And the next thing I knew, it was 9 o'clock at night, and I was at the end of the bed, still with my shoes on, still fully clothed, and I'd been asleep for 6 hours. And for the rest of that trip, I could not sleep at night. And obviously I couldn't sleep during the day because I was commentating. And I mean, I let's just say, don't go back and listen to that commentary if you want an example of some good work, because I was so tired. But yeah, I mean, there's some other amazing places. The best place by a long way was when the Foil Grand Prix was in Cancun. It was Sabre one year in Cancun as well. Amazing. It's just before Christmas. It's 28 degrees. The sun's shining the whole day, and it was almost like some of the fences were kind of like, it doesn't really matter if I get knocked out here, because you're on an all-inclusive 5-star resort with a conference centre where the fencing happens. You're golf buggied to and fro from everywhere, so you don't walk around just because it's too hot outside. So they get you into golf buggies, and even if it's only 250 meters, and imagine carrying a fencing bag in 28 degrees and all that kind of stuff. So you really looked after well at this particular venue. And there were some pleasant evenings, let's say, enjoying cocktails in the swimming pool, which was just miraculous. There are plenty of others. I mean, the travel is part of the adventure, that's for sure.
Not too unpleasant.
No, I mean, it is enjoyable. I mean, it's sometimes a bit brutal, especially if you're traveling to Europe just for a few days. That can be a little bit brutal. But you can see some amazing things. I've flown over on a clear night over the pyramids, and you're at 28,000 feet, and the captain comes over and says, I don't want to wake anyone up, but if you look out the right-hand side, you can see the pyramids. And then there's other stuff, like we flew into somewhere in Central Europe. It could have been Tashkent, it could have been Baku, and you have to fly in the middle of the night. And you're like, why do the flights land at 2 o'clock in the morning? And then as you're flying over, there's just this area before the airport that's just completely dark, and it's some kind of military site. I don't really know what it is, but all these little things are like fascinating. And Tashkent itself, don't get much time off. I managed to get a couple of hours in the market there. Just it was like walking back 200 years in the spice market, with the spices just laid out on big copper platters in little just beautiful sights.
I know what you mean. It's really cool.
Yeah, so you sometimes see these things, and so the travel adds for me. It's an additional bonus.
Very good. So, oh my God, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. Yes, I wanted to ask about how things have changed now that since you started, that was sort of the beginning of the time of video everywhere, everyone recording everything goes up. Has fencing competition, fencing video, all that, how has it changed since that started? Like, what's the effect been?
I think there's a number of things. I mean, in terms of the fencing itself, I think foil over the last 10 years has changed fairly significantly, perhaps more so in women's foil than men's foil. The distance they fence at now is just unbelievably close. It's just remarkable. All kicked off by Chen Carlon in Tokyo, where he was standing half a step closer than anyone had ever stood before, and everyone that faced him was just like, I don't know what to do with this. And that's basically how he won the Olympic title. I mean, épée still has its variety. Sabre has now, I mean, the Korean hop, I suppose, which you now actually see in foil and épée as well. But that's now spread across the whole of the world, and people are implementing that. And in Sabre, you've got this another cycle, perhaps because of COVID, but perhaps I think because of a couple of other factors, like Bauer going off and not being a coach of a particular country and setting up his academy where anyone could come. So you're seeing this spread of athletes now from different places around the world competing at the very highest level. You've still got the big players. You've still got the Koreans, the Italians, the Americans, the French, the Germans, the Russians, obviously not at the moment. But, you know, it's been a long time since Greece has had regularly featuring athletes on the podium. It was Vassili Vugioka back in when I first started, was the only Greek women's Sabre. Now you've got Kuntura, Georgiadou, all competing with, you know, the likes of Marton, Pushtai, Brune, Berder. You know, it's kind of the, it's so that's pretty fascinating. Épée, as you said, is the variety in épée is incredible, especially in women's épée. In terms of what I've seen, technically a fencing competition happens exactly the same as it did back in 2011 when I first started. You know, the only outliers in terms of format are the zonal championships where everyone has to fence in the pools, and obviously the Olympic Games. Those are the only two, and it's as it was back then. The quality of the video has gone up. So, as with technology, as things advance, I think we're still a little bit behind the curve. We've still got, I mean, when we get to Grand Prix, we are right at the very top, setting the standards for the finals. Yeah. And so that is, you know, multiple camera angles to produce what you see on TV there, which is obviously fantastic for promoting the sport generally outside of the fencing community, but also amazing for fencing fans to be able to see the sport delivered at the way that soccer or any other major sport is delivered. But during the day, it's slightly more difficult. The venues don't really allow for the space for decent camera coverage, and it's too expensive. We're also relying on volunteers to work the cameras, and you know, there have been times where the volunteer, who's usually from the club and doing, you know, a great job sitting there, you have to concentrate a lot. Their mobile phones run out of juice, and they just unplug the camera, plug their mobile phone in, and all of a sudden we've got no feed, and they're like,
"Oh my god!"
Yeah, they're on Facebook. So there are still difficulties, but I think that the standard's certainly gone up. But I think the big thing, and it's more, James, about the video element you talked about, everyone's filming everything, putting it up everywhere. This has done two things. One, there is an expectation now to have content, and it's annoying when you don't get it. It'd be very easy just to get annoyed about everything, but there are certain restrictions. For example, getting a signal out of China is still very difficult. Getting a signal out of Cuba was difficult until a few years ago. So the Havana, if you remember, the Havana Grand Prix didn't get live coverage for a long time. Right. And so there are certain places where it's very, very difficult to get that feed out of. We've not got anything from Acapulco this weekend with the men's foilers competing in the first men's foil Olympic qualifier. So you're just relying on digital results. You're just relying on that.
That's
so there's
it's an international sport.
Yeah, it is, and the costs of there are other sports that do things in a slightly different way that I've seen. So they don't focus so much on the early stages. They pretty much put all their money into their broadcast money into the finals, and they don't really worry too much about everything else. Whereas in fencing, we seem to want to show everything, which is fine because I'm sitting here watching Plovdiv earlier on today and just seeing how people are getting on. Well done, Caroline Stuchbury. She got through to the 16. Just lost to Isra Tibus. Bit of a hammering, but it make it through to the 16.
Great result for a young fencer.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, so I'm sitting there the same as everybody else and trying to absorb as much as I can. Yeah, so that thirst, the thirst is great. But the other thing that I think is really critical, and perhaps something that not everybody knows, I was at the Commonwealth, Junior Cadet Commonwealth, when it was up in Newcastle, And I had a bunch of the Indian teams. So I'm half Indian. I'm born in the UK, but my dad's from India. And so half of the Indian team came over to me and said, "Oh, we've heard you on YouTube," and chatting away and just chatting with them. Honestly, I was flabbergasted and humbled when they turned around to me and said, "We started learning fencing from watching YouTube." The coaches learnt fencing from YouTube.
Wow.
The coaches, and then they obviously then started to appeal to the FIE about getting some training, and people started to go over there and develop fencing. But if you think about those big countries like China and like the USA, but China in particular with a massive population, India's the same. So I think India's kind of got this breakthrough now where with a little bit of investment, with some improvements that are happening in terms of infrastructure so that more sport can actually be delivered in India. To think in 20 years' time we can have an Olympic champion whose predecessor learnt fencing from watching this idiot talking about it on YouTube. It's quite phenomenal that what's happening in those 10 years.
That's crazy. That's a new time. Yeah, couldn't have imagined that before.
Yeah.
There's also a women's saber fencer, as I remember, who's done very well from India.
Bhavani Devi, yeah, she was the first Indian to qualify for fencing at the Olympic Games. She'd moved from Delhi, I believe it is that she's from, to Livorno. I think it was Livorno. It might have actually been a bit further north in Italy. So she's working under Nicola Zanetti. So great junior coach at the time for the junior Italian program, but became a personal coach to Bhavani Devi, and well, you see what the result is. I mean, I think that the sparring that she got in Italy obviously helped as well, but getting regular, high quality daily lessons. And so it's very interesting to see an Italian proudly standing at World Cups and Grand Prix with an Indian tracksuit on. It was just it was a bit bonkers. But yeah, she did the route that I think a lot of fencers around the world are doing. If you look at the likes of some of the Egyptians, I think the men's foil, you've got Aladdin Abu El Qasim, who's in Paris. Hamza's been studying in the States. In order to get better, if you're from these smaller countries, I think there is
really need those training partners.
One of the routes is definitely to go out there. Look at James Davis is over in the States and looks like he's really settled in there. Marcus has gone to the States as well, and it's all purely to get what's perceived to be better coaching, but also the sparring is so critical.
I have a question. My last prepared question. You covered it a little bit already, but the patterns you've observed that really make a great fencing match, you mentioned as some kind of story, some kind of background, the revenge match with Trent Reesonov and James Davis. What are the characteristics that make a great match that you've seen? Is it important? Would you prefer a match that's got like a good story over a match with like maybe crazy highlight touches in it? What do you think?
It's a great question. It really is, because it really made me think about what is it. I think if you look at sport in general, I think you start with that storytelling. It's always great for the commentator if at the beginning of the day, in the preview videos we go, oh, look out for this one, he or she's going to do, I think they're going to do all right, or they're starting to break through, just won the junior championships. It's always great when you get to the end of the day and those fencers are in the final, because then you're never going to predict it 100% of the time, but we don't go X is going to win. We tend to say it's going to be between these 3 or 4 fencers, so you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit. But I think any sports fan would do. If you say who's going to win the English soccer Premiership, next year, I think most neutrals are going to say, well, Man City, Liverpool, Tottenham are not having such a good. You kind of know roughly who's going to be up there. You always get shocked. So the storytelling element certainly has it's certainly a factor in what makes a good fight. But I think that it comes down to a couple of things. So you've already mentioned, I've already mentioned. Needle, if there's something, the grudge match, the repeat of, or you've got fencer X from country A who's knocked out 3 Koreans on the route to the final where they're fencing another Korean. That kind of thing kind of helps generate interest that perhaps wouldn't necessarily otherwise be there. Quality. So this Italian German men's team foil match, the quality of that fight was so high that you just blown away by every single hit was a thing of beauty. There was a fight recently, I think it was at the Turin Grand Prix, which again I walked away from at the end of. I think it was Alex Marcialis, I believe. I can't remember who he was fencing. It might be Marini. And you just walk away from it, and even I'm exhausted afterwards. I'm just like, this, there's so much to say that often the trick of being a commentator is to say nothing. If the pictures are telling the story, you can just sit there every now and again and go, wow, or he's changed the distance here. You literally just you're just sort of carrying the fight along. The fight's sort of doing its own thing, and as a commentator, you've got to know when to back off just to let it talk. I sometimes find that rather tricky because I sometimes get a little overexcited myself. So I've got people sitting next to me, engineers usually sitting next to me, and I'm jumping up and down and standing on chairs, and so I think when I'm like that, I think that's probably when I'm at my best. So quality needle, the toing and throwing, James Davis, Cherry Missinov, 10-5 down, turning it around, those come back. Watching the likes of Lepeshu in men's team 4 anchoring the French team from 13 hits down. I've seen it before where he's come from 13 hits down and won in the final match. Men's sabre, I think there's a lot of great characters in there who, trust me, when they're off the piece, they're all together. We're all staying in the same hotel. We're all roughly in the same place. And of course, we're in the venue for the same amount of time from the beginning of the day to the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it is this travelling circus of a fencing family. So you see a lot of needle on the piece that you then never see carried. You'll see them in the bar drinking a Coke afterwards. Maybe
it stays on the piece.
Maybe a beer. It absolutely does. I've seen it overflow a couple of times, but not many. However many years I've been doing this now. So I think any of those elements, quality, story, needle, the back and forth of the match, yeah. I think all of those things, and it only takes one, but if you've got 3, then you've got something that's really special. But there are these standout matches. Look at Shin Lam in London 2012. No one is going to put that down in history as the greatest fencing match in the world because it was tight, that's for sure. But everyone remembers that fight because of what was happening when there was no fencing on piece. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is a story. It took a little bit too long to get to the conclusion, and I can tell you that because I was standing commentating for the BBC. When you're doing an hour and 34 minutes of commentary on nothing, it's like, okay, this is tricky. So I think that in fencing, I think that it's going to be different for fencing fans, isn't it? Fencing fans like a particular style, or we all have our favourite weapon, of course. So it's kind of what works for you. But if it's going to come down to things, it will be quality, needle, storytelling, and then that sort of to and froing of the match, change of tactics.
Yeah, I can think of a few really excellent matches that I enjoyed watching, and your commentary on it. That Germany-Italy match had, like you said, the list of titles the people in that match had was just endless. Recently the Meinhardt winning the Turin Grand Prix, those nail biter matches, that was really excellent.
It was Meinhardt, not Marcialis. You're right. Yeah, it was. Yeah, he fenced really well.
Yeah, I love watching Meinhardt. I know we're almost out of time, and this is an unscripted question, but do you have a personal favorite to watch, or?
I'm not going to pick anyone current.
Very fair.
I do have some favourites, and I think you hear in my commentary. I try to be impartial, even when Brits are fencing. I try to be impartial. But one of the fences that just has stood out over a number of years for me in terms of just, I'm a qualified coach. I don't coach anymore, But I used to coach kids, and even when I first started commentary, I used to coach kids. And if ever I was saying to a kid, we need to tidy up your footwork, we need to work on your footwork, we have to work together to get this better because this is the most important weapon that you've got, I'd also always say, look at Elisa Di Francesca. I just think her footwork was just completely mesmerising. I could sit and watch her feet alone. And I found myself, when I was supposed to be commentating on the match, just looking at her feet and going...
It's like hypnotic.
Yeah, just incredible. So, I mean, yes, there are some incredible fencers out there. I think we all know them. But I think if you want me to pick one from the time I've been fencing, purely as a geeky fencing, from a coach perspective, watch Di Francesca's footwork. If you want your fencers to fence well, her footwork is the example we should all follow.
Very good. Thank you so much for interviewing Karim. It's been so interesting.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Thanks.